All right. Well, I think it's time to start it off. So, my name is Joe. I run Indie Arcade Wave. I cover basically news in the arcade space from arcade developers, arcade owners, and operators, and just news in the space in general. I have Tony Hauber and Rob with me. Up on the screen, you're going to see indie games basically the whole time. These are all games that have been independently developed by 1, 2, 3, 4 people. There's a bunch in there that we won't be going too deep into today, but there are 2 games we'll be focusing on. So first off, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. We've got Tony and Rob. I guess Rob, start us off. Let us know who you are and what you do.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Rob Howland. I'm the developer with my business partner, Spooky, who couldn't make it here today. The 2 of us made a game called Armed and Gelatinous, which is out on the floor. I lived in Japan for 5 years, made a language learning game, eventually forayed into entertainment-based games, and we pivoted to the arcade once we realized we had sort of a couch-based hit on our hands, and we thought it would do best in the arcade space. And that's where we are today.
I'm Tony Hauber. I make a game called Death Ball, which is wizards playing soccer. It's probably the easiest way to describe it. I got into the arcade space by playing Killer Queen, played nationally at tournaments, really loved that arcades made community, and wanted to build a box that brought people together. And so I set out to build this game, demoed it at the very place I would play Killer Queen, and the owners there told me, if you put this into a cab, we will put it in our bar. And that first cab still sits at D-Tour and SF today.
And again, I'm Joe. I also am part of the Galactic Battleground team. So I helped develop that game from primarily the balancing, marketing, sales side. Kelly and Dylan, who are the artist and the original developer, created the game. We all love Galaga, so we were like, why don't we make it multiplayer Galaga? Dylan showed me the game on a very late night after a concert, and I played one game and immediately was like, how do I get involved? What can I do? How can we make this move? And the only game that we were aware of at the time was Killer Queen. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Killer Queen. That was the only indie game that we even knew of, and then we found out there were a lot more at the first convention we went to, and ever since then I felt like I needed to cover the space and let people know what's going on so that more people that want to build indies have that opportunity and have the resources to find information about it. I want to jump into more theory around the games, like the development, the importance of the development, and game theory. And when you're designing an indie game for the arcade, you have to go at it from a completely different angle than you would if you were just designing for a home console. You have to specifically be developing for the players in the arcade space. That means you have a different attention span on the game. You have different objectives in the game, as well as you need to make the operator money. So whoever is owning the arcade wants to be making money on it. So let's dive into the importance of game development and theory in developing for the arcade space.
Yeah. Well, quickly before we get going too far, can I get like a show of hands? Who in here is here because they are interested in thinking about making an arcade game? All right.
Sweet.
And I set out to build a game that would build community and bring people together, and that was my initial thought. And when you start getting into the development, you realize quickly that arcade demands certain things. And unlike a title game where somebody's going to pay you anywhere between $10 to $60, and then that's the transaction, they're going to play the game, you have to earn every quarter at a time. And not only do you have to earn every quarter at a time, you have to earn it at a rate that people want to put it into a bar, because if your cab gets a quarter every hour, that's not going to do it. So I think a lot of consideration has to go into, at the end of that game, they have to really want to do something more. They have to see something in the game that they can do more, and that drives them to put that next quarter into the cab. And I think that's essential when it comes to arcade games.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a completely different mindset going into it, and we actually didn't develop our game initially thinking that it would be an arcade game. It just kind of like happened that way, which I wouldn't recommend doing. It was just kind of like a lucky break. But Yeah, we realized that our game was simple enough, and simplicity is really the key. We did design it with simplicity in mind, and we realized, having a 2-button game made it really easy to put into an arcade. If your game requires 5, 6, 7 buttons, it's going to be pretty difficult to translate to the arcade space. Not only will you end up having to fit all those buttons on the control panel, but you'll be confusing the heck out of all of your players trying to figure it out in that sort of more casual setting than, say, at home on the couch. So simplicity, not just with the controls, but also with the game design, comes into play a lot with arcade-based games, so that players will pick it up pretty quickly without having to do a whole tutorial or something like that. You really only have a limited amount of time to get that turnover in the arcade from player to player to player. So having to explain complex game mechanics isn't something that translates well into the arcade space.
I think it's especially in the modern age where people go to an arcade bar and 90% of the games there are not new games. They're there for a little bit of nostalgia. When arcades first came out, that was the way you played video games. So if it took you, 5 tries to really get into the game, you weren't going to go find some nostalgic game that you knew already. So a lot of our games, there's very little menu between you and playing. You got the first 10 seconds, somebody has to feel like they can act on the game, and that's I think that's pretty essential too, is getting them into that flow as fast as possible.
Yeah, that's really big. One thing we ended up doing with the Galactic Battleground is I think we're on our 7th or 8th UI variation, and the reason we like this variation is because you hit the fire button and you're in. It's 10 seconds, you're into the game. And we had so many different things to select, ships, power-ups, all these different things in between. And as we cut it down, we found that a lot more people were in the game, playing the game. The faster you can get people into the game, the better. I mean, what is it like to play Galaga or Pac-Man? You hit the button, you're playing. It's that quick. So the faster you can get people playing the game, the better off you're going to be, the more quarters your game's going to earn, and the more people are going to play it, the more they're going to tell other people about it. So that's a really important thing about it. And I guess one other thing that we hadn't touched on about the development side is, when you're developing specifically for an arcade, when that's your first goal in mind, you need to really think about your control layout. Like Rob said, keep it simple, a couple buttons. It's good to map your controls first. You're gonna say, I have a joystick and 2 buttons at most, or a joystick and 1 button. Let yourself, give yourself all of the buttons you're gonna have, so you know what you have to work with when you're building mechanics. When you're playing Death Ball, there's a lot of different ways that you can use that 1 button. It's 1 button, but you have so many different actions to do with it, along the lines of the Mario 64 idea of the jump, the slam, the slide, the triple jump. It's all essentially 1 button, making all that happen. So you can do a lot with very, very few controls, and that's what you do in the arcade space. You take a limited amount of options and you do as much as you possibly can with them.
And I think we talk a lot about designing games, and I feel more than designing games, I discover games, because you're never going to be the person who comes up with this idea that is going to be fun from the get-go. You have to chase that fun. You have to find it. You have to get the components as fast as you can into the screen and figure out where the fun is in this exchange of 2 players or single player versus AI is going to be. And a great example of that is if anybody here has played Death Ball, you're a wizard. As you jump around, you leave this little bubble behind, and the last place you jumped, it's kind of like a pinball bumper, and that's an essential part of the game that differentiates it from a lot of other games. And that whole concept was a bug. It was a bug at one time. I wanted the bubble to follow you. I thought I really wanted to show that you had this kick. And the very first time I did it, as you get into game development, everything has a transform that you're adding this stuff to, and I just forgot to add it to the transform. And so here I am playing it. I jump around. Oh, that's funny. That bubble didn't follow me. And then the ball kicked off of it, and I was like, wait a second. Maybe that's the game right there.
Love that.
And so you really don't get too bogged down in making the perfect concept. Just get in and start trying things. If you love video games, you'll know it's fun. You'll feel it.
That goes along the line of, I talk to a lot of people about this, and testing is the #1 thing when you're making an arcade game. Whether you can take it to a convention, you can get it tested, you can take it to an arcade. Finding a local arcade near you that is already interested in indie games is huge for you. It will give you the leverage of being able to drop the game somewhere, get testing right away, and it doesn't hurt your pocket too much, because let's be real, building these cabinets, testing these cabinets can get expensive. There are a lot of ways to save money on it, whether you build it yourself or you use a shell of an old cabinet, a classic cabinet. There's a lot of different avenues that you can get around to make it happen for cheap, but testing is number one. Like Tony, when he was first testing, you can actually see it, it's in the auditorium right now. He has just the playfield with the buttons that he plugs into a monitor. It's simple, it's small, it's basically what it would feel like on an arcade cabinet, but he can take that anywhere around the country and get it tested. So building something like that right off the bat is really important.
Make sure it can fit in a suitcase.
Yes.
There was a period of time where I was bringing an Xbox One dev kit over to my friend's house because he would have parties every weekend, and I was putting it on his television in the living room and just watching as people played and like taking notes and writing down like every bug or every issue or every time somebody like got confused, so I could fine tune it until people got it like right off the bat. And that really helped once it reached the arcade space, because that was all before, you know, we were just doing a couch-based multiplayer game. And then once it went to the arcade, it was already so easy to pick up. So those sort of like testing scenarios really helped drive that simplicity into the arcade.
And with that, I'll also say, like, do not get discouraged. I took games to the arcade several times, and many of the times after somebody finished playing them, I basically had to beg them to play me again, because I needed 2 players to test it out. And this happened many times, and there was one time with Death Ball when I took that, the very first time I got done with somebody playing it, I kind of looked over and they said, "Can I play again?" And that's when I knew like I had something. And so don't get too into your first idea. Don't get too discouraged if it's not working. Just find that nugget that's going to be at the center of a game that drives fun gameplay, and then start to develop the concept around it.
Yeah, be ready to scrap stuff or completely change a mechanic as well. It's big. I mean, we spoke about it the last time I interviewed you on the podcast about the jump mechanic. He basically had it set so you could only jump once or twice. Yeah. And somebody was like, "I want to be able to jump more." And he asked, "How much more?" And they said, "As much as I want." So he got to the point where now when people either win or they're warming up or anything, you see people just spamming the button because you're ready to jump as much as you can, set the bubble as much as you can. And it just like becomes muscle memory that anytime you get up there, you have to tap the button as much as possible. And that was player feedback from testing that completely changed his game.
And I think it was like, I think it's set to 1,000. So because I had a variable for it and I set it to 1,000. And then as soon as we played, I was like, this is the game. And there's something special about there because when I started, I thought I was like so much smarter than my players about what my game was. And I thought like, no, this is a trade-off. You jump and then you get one flip. And if you're out of position, you're out of position. It came very much from Rocket League, if anybody's familiar with that. And as soon as like I trusted the player about what they wanted and we played it the first time, I was like, no, this is the game. Like, and that really taught me I got to listen to my players because they're not dumb. They know arcades. They play games. They know what's fun. And so
they're the ones paying for the game at the end of the day. You know, the arcade owner buys it and puts it in there, but the players are the ones that are paying for the game. So taking their feedback is important so that you can continue to spread the word about your game.
And to add to that, though, it's really essential to listen to what they want, but maybe not their solution sometimes, too, because they are not the expert of what is driving the fun in the game. And so a big feedback I got a lot is I want a turbo button. And in my head, I had this idea that I wanted to build a one-butt. I set out to build a one-butt, a joystick and one button, because I just loved how simple that was. So people kept asking, I want a turbo button, I want a turbo button. And I at some point, I was like, I discovered that what they're telling me is they want to go fast. So I built this mechanic called the slide. You hold down and press jump on the ground. You fly across the screen. And that request for a turbo button evaporated after that. So I gave them not necessarily what they said they thought they wanted, but like really what at the heart of it is what they wanted, to go fast.
Love that.
Yeah, I think that was a good move on that part. And you have to take all the feedback you get and use what you think is necessary, continue testing, tweak things, and eventually you get there. It took us, Galactic Battleground is finally where we want it, and it's been about 5 years of developing and testing. So it's been out there, it's sold to arcades, but we're still tweaking it even now. Let's talk about approaching arcades, getting it in the arcade. What are some good steps to take this idea that you have, this thought, turn it into a cabinet, and then bring it to an arcade? How do you get there?
Yeah, because once you build a game and even build a cabinet and you have it, you have to convince somebody, an arcade owner out there, to take a chance and put your game on the floor, and chances are they're going to have to take another game off the floor to fit yours in there because they're maximizing their space. You know, their real estate costs money every square foot, so you really have to kind of work your way in there just to get a chance to compete on that level. And you're going to be up against, you know, Pac-Man and Galaga and all these games that have been sitting in there, you know, since the 80s. How do you compete? So you got to get somebody to take a chance on you. And I can tell you the way we did it was we were based in LA at the time, and there was an arcade down the street called Button Mash. And we went in and talked to the owner while we were just building our prototype. We hadn't even finished our cabinet yet, and somehow convinced him to take a chance on it. And it turned out he was already thinking about taking a chance on another indie game. It was a game called Donut County that's out on mobile devices, and it's all everywhere, actually, I think. And they actually built a prototype arcade unit, and they were going to put it on the floor. So he was like, yeah, let's do 2 games. So we had, you know, this opportunity with Button Mash, and we actually were building them on the East Coast. And once we finished it and shipped it out there, yeah, he tried it out. And he had given us like a target that if it had made this much by the end of the first month, he would buy it. And it did make that much, and then he didn't buy it. And we were like, oh man, that sucks. So even at that point, you know, convincing an arcade owner to spend the money and get the cab in there, you know,
And
it's pretty difficult thing to do.
And I would say be prepared to travel. And it's tough. I remember the first MGC I went to, you know, I'm explaining, oh, I'm building this game. It's Death Ball. Like, this is how it works. And that was 6 years ago. And like, finally, when I went back this last year, people showed up and they're like, oh, Death Ball's here. Oh yeah, I'm excited. I was looking forward to this. It takes time for people to know about your game. You don't have the benefit of the internet publishing your game. You don't have itch.io. I mean, you can go that route if you want to get your game out there, but if you're really trying to focus on building an arcade game, you really have to spend the time traveling, meeting people, and getting the physical with the joysticks and the buttons out there so people can play it and become attached to it.
It's a lot different than playing it on a controller, on a TV. You know, once you stand in front of the machine and you see, you know, the quality of the build and like the feel of the buttons, it's really important. It's a whole different experience. Yeah, but you know, they also cost $500 plus to ship them around the country, so not
Right.
fun.
And Rob's story is very common for the space. Like I'm from Minneapolis, and we approached Up Down in Minneapolis, and we were like, hey, we have this game. We're thinking about putting it in an arcade cabinet. Would you guys be interested in showing it? And they gave us the go. They were like, yep, we'll put it in here for a little while, and we built it. You know, that's what happened. And Tony did a very similar thing, and I know Crab Volleyball did a similar thing, Killer Queen, like all of these games that have done this basically just went to their local arcade and was like, can we try this? Are you up for this? And the story does end a lot of the time like Rob's, because it's the first game. They don't always want it, but it turns into your traveling cabinet. That's the cabinet that you take to conventions. That's the cabinet that you put in a different arcade. You can send it to a different state. Keep it fairly close, so if you have to do maintenance, you're able to get out there and do maintenance on it. But it takes time, a lot of patience to get these games going, but it pays off in the end, and it's really rewarding to like Tony was saying, he went to MGC. I was there with him. I was there at the first one with him too, and it was so cool to see these people come up to him and be like, hey, I love your game. I saw it 6 years ago, and I'm ready to put it in my basement. They bought his game just to play it by themselves in the basement. So people do really love these games, and it's so rewarding when someone gives you that validation of like, I really, really do enjoy your game.
Yeah, we had ours at a number of arcades before it ended up where it is now at Wonderville, and that was our first unit, and we actually still own it. We kind of just have it there because they're a free play arcade and they're kind of indie and community driven.
Yeah, they're only indie games. It's a full arcade in Brooklyn that has nothing but indie games.
Really special place. If you're ever out that way, highly recommend it if you haven't been there. And that unit we actually built entirely by hand without a CNC. It was a whole process. There's some photos in here of us like with power tools building that one. After that, we were like, never again. We breathed in way too much melamine sawdust. I don't know. I'll have some rare form of cancer later in life, but It was gross. And so after that, we found a CNC partner, thanks to the guys at Killer Queen that introduced us to them. And it happened to be an hour away from where we were building them. So we just went and picked them up and then started building them in my friend's workshop, doing just assembly, none of the power tool stuff anymore, thankfully. And all the assembly, we've done all 9 of our units by hand at this point. But at some point, we'll probably want to end up working with a contract manufacturer to build them, because it gets pretty exhausting and taxing on your body, building them all by hand.
It takes a long time too.
Yeah.
It does save you a ton of time and a lot of energy to go with the manufacturer. And if you're looking at making an indie arcade game and you need a manufacturer, just let me know. Just hit me up on Instagram or anything. It's very easy to get connected with these people. It takes a little while to get it going, but the one that the majority of indie developers are using actually produces cabinets for Stern and Sega and Namco as well. So they're a very reputable source to be creating cabinets. They have engineers and everything. They've got multiple warehouses. It's a whole ordeal out there. It's in Wisconsin, so it's right by me.
It's like an assembly line.
Yeah, it is very much an assembly line.
Yeah.
It also helps a lot to gain trust with these arcade owners, because they don't want to buy something that's going to fall apart, made amateurly, and they don't want to maintain something doesn't have all the thought put into it about how maintenance works and stuff. So you can get into those traps if you build your own stuff. That's why, going back to having a local cab, be the tech of your own product, because it's good to know when it breaks down. My cab is extremely hard on joysticks. In the beginning, we had joysticks would break out of the bottom of the panel. Now we have them, they're like carriage bolted to the panel so they won't come off. But you only know this stuff by being there and seeing it happen and teching it yourself.
It's patience and experience. Like, as time goes on, you'll find things that you can update, you can modify that make it significantly better, and it just goes the long haul with that. So community is a huge part of the indie development scene, obviously just in general, but when it comes to the arcade space, we're a small group of people, so it's very niche and very unique. So let's talk about how important community has been to you guys, and obviously, we all know about Killer Queen, how big that scene is, and that community is everything. I mean, Nikita and Josh aren't really doing anything to build that scene. It's all the community that's driving that game. So let's talk about what community has been for you guys.
I think, of all the accomplishments Deathball has, one of the ones that's the most important to me is in Kagan Coin. I think they have the longest running league, and they've been playing every week since 2018. A group of 10 to 20 of them get together to do it. And sales aside, numbers aside, the fact that these 10 to 20 people make a whole day of their life around playing at this machine and having camaraderie. That's what I did this for. That's why I built this, instead of putting it online and making people compete from the solitariness of their own living room over, LAN or over the Wi-Fi or whatever. I did that with Rocket League, and I just sat there one day and I was like, I used to have friends, and we'd play GoldenEye, and we'd have all this fun together, and now I'm here, and my teammates over there saying, what a save, what a save, what a save. He doesn't even know me. He's just totally tilted, and it's maddening that this used to be fun, and now it's so defeating. And so getting people together and having that camaraderie, that's huge to me. So that's still my favorite accolade is that long-standing league.
Yeah, I think that's why we wanted to make a multiplayer game to begin with, was because of community. I mean, playing with your friends on the couch was the goal that we had set out for. We saw a hole in the market with couch-based games. They just aren't really getting made anymore. A lot of it's gone online, and that party-based vibe was something that we really missed, and that's what we set out to achieve with Orange and Gelatinous when we were developing it. Then that translated really nicely into the arcade with a 4-player stand-up cabinet. And that sense of playing with your friends at, this competitive kind of game, but it's a little bit more lackadaisical. It's not super competitive. It's kind of cutesy and fun. And it's really taken off with families and kids. And that's been really wonderful to see as well, is just families coming together and friends coming together and playing the game and having a great time. In terms of I don't know, competitive community. That's not sort of the thing that Armed and Gelatinous is building. As much as I would love to see that, it just wasn't really the goal of the game. And I don't really expect there to be sort of like a die-hard Armed and Gelatinous community out there. But I do expect there to be a lot of like fun times at the arcade and on the couch with your friends and just, killing the heck out of each other.
Yeah, the community has been really big for us at Galactic Battleground as well. One thing that's a very easy way to basically entice an arcade to want to demo your game, but also get feedback from players and build a community all at the same time is league nights. I mean, obviously Killer Queen does league nights. It's absolutely massive for the game. We were doing it with Galactic Battleground at a couple arcades near Minneapolis, where we would have people come out once a week, and you'd come out, you'd play. Winning team would get $50, and you'd get like a growler of beer from this local brewery that we're at, or you'd get a handful of tokens from this arcade, or you'd get a t-shirt. And giving out little things like that gives incentive for them to come back, but it's also just constant playtesting. Like if you're running a tournament for 2 hours, you have 2 hours worth of bugs and glitches and things that you're finding, and it helps really accelerate the rate at which your game is being developed and is growing. I don't think there was too much more we want to talk about. I know we wanted to open it up to Q&A because obviously there's a lot of questions in the base of creating a game and then putting it in a cabinet and getting it in an arcade. So I think we're ready to open up to Q&A.
I had two more points. They're brief though. In terms of like development things that you'll want to consider when making an arcade game. One of them is rather important and was one that we kind of forgot to do initially, and then one of the operators reached out and they were like, "Where's the operator menu?" And we were like, "Oh yeah, that's important." So just having like a little test area in the back menus of your game, like you hide like a little button inside somewhere, so unlock it, hit a button, and it pops up this operator menu, and it'll show all your coin count, stats of how many games have been played, what version you're running, a support email, stuff like that you want to put in there, as well as a little test area, so when you press all the buttons and move all the joysticks, an operator can see that everything's working without having to go through the whole menu and into the game and test all 4 players. Like it's just there. It all works. Those sorts of features are really appreciated by operators and is something that usually, gets forgotten in development. I'm an example of that. And then attract mode is another really important thing that when nobody's playing your game, what is your game doing? Something on the screen, flipping between, gameplay screens and that sort of stuff, just to give people an idea of what they're going to get when they put a quarter in. Otherwise, it's kind of like, what am I playing here? So those sorts of menus are really important and something to consider when you're making your game.
I also think the attract loop is something that is a nice tool to show people the kind of depth of your game, because when they play it, they're not going to be this excellent player. But if you have these 2 awesome players jumping around, kicking the ball all over the place, and they get in there and they play and they think like, that's a goal I want to get to. Like I could be that. Like that is good motivation to put that next quarter in and try to be that player that has all this control and motion.
Yeah, I think that is a very, very important part, to let people know what they're getting into before they even start playing. It gives them an idea of what the game's going to be. Let's do social medias really quick so that people know where they can follow whatever game we're talking about, and then we'll jump into Q&A. So I run Indie Arcade Wave. You can find us basically on everything. I do full 20 to 50 minute podcasts on YouTube. So if you want to watch the full form, YouTube is there with the video. And then I'm also on the podcast areas. And then Galactic Battleground, just look up Galactic Battleground. You'll find us on pretty much every social media.
I'm just Deathball Arcade. You can find us at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And deathball.cab is the website if you want to go there and get on the mailing list.
And we are Armed Gelatinous on most platforms. And then our Discord is discord.gg/blobsonline. So come check us out. And it's really cool. We actually print out all of our match stats in the Discord, live. All of our cabs are online and just posting up the scores. So if you want to go back and look at how badly you beat your friend, you can do that.
All right. So who's got questions?
Hey, could you talk a little bit about your process, once you're done with the game, building the cab, transferring it over to the cab, or compiling if that is involved or anything like that? And also, what kind of tools do you use to make your arcade games specifically?
Yeah. So I actually, like, somebody asked me this question recently, like, how do I take coins? Like, how does that work? And it's really simple once you get into it. Most things have this micro switch, and all it is it switches between, it's just switches between on and off, essentially, when it's pressed. And then you have this thing called an input controller. There's plenty of them. I use an iPack. All it does is it wires up the ground and the lead for that micro switch, and it turns it into keystrokes. So you just build a game that takes keystrokes. Like if you have if you could hook a keyboard up to Death Ball, you just press 5, that signifies a quarter to the game. So it adds a quarter to the ledger, and when there's enough, it'll debit from the ledger, internal ledger to play the game. So it seems like, how do I build my own controllers that'll hook up into this? And as soon as you get an iPack, it all just becomes very simple. You're just dealing with a keyboard input.
Yeah, so those quarters just come in, hit the switch, trigger that thing, and then there's a credit.
And it even extends, like, the first time somebody asked me, oh, can you put a bill validator in? I was like, oh my God, a bill validator? How am I gonna have to? Nope, it just literally the bill validator says, how many like pulses do you want per dollar? And you tell it, and it'll just pulse 4 quarters, and that tells my game that, oh, the key 5 was pressed 4 times, so add 4 credits to the ledger. So it's so weird how simple that is and how daunting it was at first to figure that out.
Yeah, that kind of blew my mind. I was like, oh, it's just a button. Cool.
Yep.
And then you asked about software, is that right?
Yeah, and just like.
Like
for example,
construction, like construction of the cabinet.
Yeah, the software construction, that sort of stuff.
Oh, so for like the 3D design of the physical components?
No, I meant more just like
Putting the wood
if
together.
there's any specific tools that you use for like, because for example, like okay, you're making the game and then you're putting it into the like hardware that goes into the cabinet.
Oh,
so is there any specific software that helps you do that?
Well, for Armed and Gelatinous, we just built a PC and put it in there. So it's basically just running it. But we run it on Linux, and we're using a Linux build from Unity as our game software. So
I think
yeah.
most of the developers are running
Yep.
Linux over Windows. There's a lot of issues with running Windows.
Yeah, I didn't want to sell a cab with a Microsoft product on. I feel like I would get sued or something. So yeah, it seemed bad. So we went with a Linux distro. It's like a Debian distro called Sparky, and we like hide all of that, so it just looks like a black screen and then boots the game after like 5 seconds. So yeah, it's pretty clean startup, which I like.
You're probably going to want to look for Linux. Keeps the cost down because you don't have a license, and you're going to want to look for an LTS version of Linux. We're on Ubuntu 20 right now for Death Ball, which is an LTS, which means long time service, which means they'll send patches to it for a lot longer than their normal builds. And then I have a script that I run that sets everything up. I actually use GitHub for my version control, so clones the repo, sets everything up, sets up some startup scripts so it runs the game right away, and then when you turn it on, it boots right into the game.
I would say for cabinet construction, I haven't actually built any of the cabinets. We've had someone build them, or we've gone through manufacturers. One really good, like easy way that I've heard from developers is building like the little box like Tony, just like the portable playfield. Taking an old cabinet, like I know a handful of people, I think it was Street Cleaner, he made his game and they just took an old Spy Hunter cabinet that was just destroyed, and they just gutted everything and just used, they used the box. They just had to redo the playfield and put a new monitor in it, and they were pretty much done. That's a really easy, cheap way to get into it. I've even heard of people buying one-ups and just gutting them because it's a smaller form factor. If you just have like 2 players on it, it's pretty easy to get on there. And it's a great way to just test it. Like obviously, don't put it in an arcade. It's going to get beat up and it's going to get probably destroyed. But having that physical arcade cabinet, you can at least like get an idea of how it's going to function, and then like look up like Wonderville. You can jump into the Indie Arcade Wave Discord. Mark will answer basically any question you have. He's in New
Mark's
York.
great.
All he does is build cabinets.
Yeah.
So most of the indie guys that are out here now have like already talked to Mark about building it, and he helps them on the right direction.
Mark does a panel where he builds an arcade cabinet on stage.
Yeah, at MagFest, like 20 something.
He's insane.
So you can watch that full video of him building the cabinet step by step on the panel. He's a massive resource, and I don't think he's turned anybody away that I've sent to him. So, any other questions?
Hi, I was just curious, so obviously a lot of the cabinets now that you guys are making, they're awesome by the way, but they're multiplayer, which makes sense because you more money, more players, more engagement, all that stuff. But, you know, we think back to classic, there was a lot more classic ones that were, I want to say Dragon Slayer or something, you know, that were almost like one-player type games. Obviously, we're talking about difference in hardware and technology, but I'm just curious, like, do you think that it's just a total risk gamble to make like an arcade game that's more one-player focused nowadays?
No. I wish Dan was here to answer that.
Yeah, I really was. So Dan was supposed to be on the panel. He's sick. He is on the side of, he basically gets an IP from someone that's already built an indie game that he loves, and he puts it into a cabinet. The first game that he did was Switch and Shoot, single player, one button.
Actually, yeah.
That game earns like no other. Like it's hard for me to say that that isn't like one of the best earners for all of the games because it's quick and it's cheaper for arcades to buy. You know, he's at like the 4,500 price point. Most indies are in the 6,000, so it's a little bit easier. It's a smaller form factor, one button. And like Black Emperor as well. That's another Bumble Bear game.
That's such a good game.
A different developer. They found him at a convention. I interviewed him as well. That was one of my favorite stories for indies. He was in film for a very long time, and then he was like, I want to build a video game. Moved to New York, went to school. First game he made, smashed it.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen very often, but it happened for him. And it was a mobile game originally. So there's definitely room. What am I forgetting? Downwell. Obviously, it's not like an officially licensed one. There's one built in Fort Lauderdale, and you know, there's definitely room for single player.
That
games.
translates well to the arcade.
Yeah,
I think-
it translates incredibly well to the arcade.
I think the reason you don't, it's hard, you'll see less of them is you have to generate a lot more content. You have to build the levels that they're going to move through.
Yeah.
And when I think about two-player 1v1 games, and we've thought about a single-player version of Deathball for a while, and that's something we want to add, but it's like instant user-generated content because I don't have an AI that you can learn all the moves of and then defeat. It's another human being that AI and developing all the creative solutions to things that you do. And that's really compelling, and I don't have to do any work for it. So that is part of the reason you might see more multiplayer games because they get a cheat by not having as much content. They kind of just get to ease right into that. So
A lot of the times I wish I made a single player game because the one thing that our game is missing is a high score component. And single player games are built on that. And getting your name on the board at an arcade is like, you know, some serious bragging rights. So at some point we are thinking about developing at least like a cooperative multiplayer where you're fighting the AI and trying to get your names on the high score or something like that, because that's just something that is blatantly missing from our game that, you know, single player games get to do.
So I addressed that at Deathball with a ranked mode that is in every cab, but like is a hidden feature where if you can press and hold the button and you can create a user and then you sign into that user, and if both users are signed in, then there's an ELO like kind of competition that happens with death coins. You start off with 40 death coins when you create an account. And so if you hold down on both joysticks, it'll show you the legendary wizard screen. And that's something we want to build into to be a more obvious thing, but it's, again, we don't want to get in your way in the front. So it's how do you step up to the cab, press the button and play, and then maybe we can pack that stuff into the end, like getting signups and getting you into that.
I remember the day Dwight showed me that at Glitch Bar, and I freaked out. I was like, what? You can log in? That was so crazy.
And
Maybe after your first game, like after a game of Deathball pops up on the screen, if you want to be a legendary wizard, I'm kidding.
No, I mean like there are ideas like that.
Sure.
Yep, getting it. I think like games that are great about starting and playing right away. Hades, if you haven't played that, you start the game, you're in the underworld and you're playing, you don't know why you're there, you don't know what you're doing, and yet there's all this stuff that comes after you finish your round. You can decorate your house and get all the story and stuff. And so I think about that a lot when I'm thinking about where do I want to take Deathball or where do I want to take my future games. You got to press the button and play, but maybe we can pack a little stuff in the end in that like 10-second countdown time that is traditional for arcade games.
I want to say, like, just because you make a multiplayer cabinet doesn't mean you can't have a single player element. Like with Galactic Battleground, for a couple of years, we were testing a single player mode. We absolutely rushed it because there was a local coin operator that wanted the game, but he wouldn't put it out unless it had single player. And we enjoyed it, but it was fun for that first play. And once you beat it, you were like, I don't need to play this again. So it's the balance of having a multiplayer and a single player game of how do you make the multiplayer fun and engaging, but not change the elements of the gameplay for multiplayer or for single player, but still keep it engaging as a single player game. So there's a lot of elements, like if you're gonna develop a single player game, just do that. If you're gonna do a multiplayer game, just do that. And then once you're really set and comfortable, like then you can start taking it, because now you have a community built around you. You can take it to conventions, be like, all right, we're doing a single player, check this out, tell us what you think. And it doesn't have to go public, but you can test it at that point and decide if you want your multiplayer cabinet to also be a single player cabinet.
I think the thing is too, like, you can always bridge those things, but you have to understand what the heart of your game is. In like, you take Deathball, for example, you might say like, oh, well, the heart of the game is to score a goal. And that's not the heart of the game. The heart of the game is anticipating where the ball's going to be. And so I've talked a lot about single player. I've gotten that ask a lot, and I do want to build it, but I don't want to build AI because I just like, that's my own personal thing. I don't like building AI. So as I develop the single player, it is that core. If the single player could be a roguelike of anticipating where the ball is going to be and fighting through levels, if you can do that, then it'll always feed back into this game thing that makes the game fun.
All right, any other questions?
Do you guys typically have networking in the arcades, or like how do you deal with like updates and like Unity accounting and stuff?
I'm glad you asked. I actually just wanted to mention that. So our arcade wasn't online at first, and then we realized much later that we did not want to travel to every arcade around the country and update it when we had something to update. So we ended up buying a bunch of wireless cards and going around. I did one tour of every arcade that was currently alive and installed a wireless card and connected it to their local Wi-Fi so we could push updates to it. And then I went about pushing an update that broke my ability to update them, and I went on another tour,
happened exactly to us, too.
fixing
Yeah, same thing.
all of them and getting it to work. So that was fun. But yeah, now it's working really well, and we're able to push updates at our leisure. So that's nice, you know, in 2023's arcade landscape, that we have the ability to update our games, which was something that was not possible when arcades were in their heyday.
Yeah, I highly recommend going that route, being able to do it wirelessly, push updates like that. It helps you a lot with testing as well. Like if you have, say you have 10 arcade cabinets out and you have 2 locations that do really well and you want to test there, you can focus on just those 2 with the new patch. It gives you the flexibility of being able to update what you need to update. It helps you, it saves you a ton of money from traveling to every single arcade to re-update. But sometimes you have technical things, and I mean, we had the exact same issue. We pushed an update and it crashed everything. So we had to go and manually do it for a lot of arcades. Or what we did to save the money was we just sent them a flash drive. We were like, here, just reinstall this.
Sometimes your deployment strategy is UPS.
Yeah, we tried the flash drive thing a few times and struggled over the phone with arcade operators trying to get them to install our new build. Hi, Dylan. And yeah, that was pretty challenging for us and them, and we didn't want that sort of frustrating, you know, relationship with all of our owners. So yeah, we figured out another idea.
Can you download the stats of how well the cabinet's doing, like, and how many quarters people are putting in per hour?
So that's another thing that I would recommend. I was thinking about that when you asked your question, and I didn't say it, but we actually, when we built Galactic Battleground, Kelly coded in full tracking of the entire game, so we can see how many games are getting played, how many players are on the cabinet, what power-ups are being used, what power-ups are winning, what combos. So we went ahead and just tracked an unnecessary amount of stuff, so that as it got played in different locations, we could see what was kind of growing, what was overpowered, what we needed to balance out a little bit more, and as well as like how much it was making. So most of the time when the arcades are hooked up, we can see exactly how many coins are going into the cabinet. We can actually see how much it's earning. So that gives us a good idea of the ones that we've already sold and are not, like, we've gotten our money, now they're getting their money. We can say, is this earning enough? And we can show other arcades that it is actually earning this much at this location, which is similar to how your arcade is set up.
I'd be very careful with that data, though, because, you know, that is their business.
Yes.
And they don't want other people knowing their business, which is their private thing. So just be careful with that information.
Yeah, we don't ever disclose whose arcade it is. We say this is another arcade bar that operates similar to yours, that has alcohol and you pay to get in. It's on free play. So we let them know like they're structured just like you, and this is about how it's performing.
Yeah, it's important data to have, and I set up a Discord webhook once we put our cabinets online, and every time the cabinet boots up, it gives us a report of like the previous day's earnings, and its number of plays, and whether it was 2-player, 3-player, or 4-player games, and how many of those there were, versus how many battle plays versus, we have like a soccer game and a blitz football game on there too, and it spits out how many of those were played, so we can see like what's popular and what's working. And it kind of helps us shape the game for the future, like where do we want to put our effort into further developments when we do release an update. So it is really useful data to have. So yeah, it's nice to know, if your game is actually popular or not.
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
The guts of these machines similar? Is there like a standard kit that you would use for that?
We built our own custom PC, but it's very simple. I mean, we're talking a processor with a graphics card on it, some RAM, and and a jump drive that is our memory stick. It's very simple, very easy, nothing crazy, so that we can keep costs down on it. But we built it so that it can, it could run 3-4 times what we're demanding of it.
It's not like the JAMA days.
Yeah.
It's, you don't have a ton of boards in there. My Deathball we run, it's like optimized to run on a single board x86 computer called an Udo Advanced Plus, and I love that board because it's just contained, has 3 display outputs, and is just like perfect for what we do. But it's like mine is limiting, so they got space to grow theirs. Mine has to maintain optimization because that hardware is limiting.
Are we out of time?
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you have any other questions for us, we are on the floor. Like right when you walk in, you'll find Armed and Gelatinous, Deathball, and Galactic Battleground. So come play with us, challenge us to our games, and yeah, feel free to ask us any questions if you didn't get to ask one here. You can play Armed and Gelatinous at like Wonderville, Glitch Bar. I know
Control.
that it's at Ground Control here in Portland. Just arrived at Addaball up in Seattle, and yeah, there's a few other arcades around the country, Salt Lake City and other places. But you have like what, 35? I don't know if you want to list them all right now.
I don't even know. I've lost track of some of them. They're somewhere, but yeah, there's. The closest one to here is Addaball, so if you're interested here, in Addaball is the place to go. So, but yeah.
Yeah, we've got a Galactic Battleground at Ground Control right now, and if you guys want to know more about the indie scene, the arcades, and you have questions, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram and YouTube. That's where I'm most active. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Ground Control.
Yeah, thank you, Ground Control, for
putting our
having
games
us
here.
here.
Appreciate you.
All right, thanks for coming, everybody.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and to the right are a few more videos from the Portland Retro Gaming Expo 2023. Thanks for watching.